You say that Agastya is India's best kept secret. Why do you say that?
I believe honestly that it's partly to do with the fact that it's run by extremely pure altruists. And this is something that I found out to an even deeper extent when I wrote the book and did interviews, that people are not really interested in um, having a story even written about them, which is quite remarkable. They were just happy enough that they were getting to tell their anecdotes, getting to recount their experiences, and there was a joy and a kind of an ownership to the whole story, that this is what we've done, and we're not expecting anybody to pat us on the back or sing our praises or anything like that. It is a great, well kept secret, as I said, perhaps one of the best kept secrets because no one really knows how much good work they've been doing.
What are the key problems that Agastya or the founding fathers they found that needs to be changed?
So the main problem was the system by which children were being educated in India. To say that, look, we're giving these kids degrees, but we're not actually teaching them how to approach things from a first principle. We're not
Fair.
teaching them is kind of the system of inquiry where you ask why until you reach the answer. And that there was a system of answerism, a kind of situation where getting the right answer was more important than having a discussion about why the answer is right.
Hello, sir. Welcome to Sanely Spoken. It's glad to have you on the show. Thank you so much for firstly agreeing to the podcast, and I hope we have a good discussion here. So, I have read the book, obviously, The Moving of Mountains. It's a fascinating read. Mostly when you read books about an NGO, a non-profit organization, mostly it strikes to you that this must be just about some bashing about the work NGO has done. And in India, the sad reality of an NGO is that it is not looked up very in a very positive note because for obvious reasons. But having read about Agastya in this book for the past 4 days now, I have been reading this book, and it's not like any other NGO, I must say. It's a 25-year long journey, so it's very fascinating read, and obviously we're going to discuss about this. So, sir, let's begin with something very interesting that you point out in the book, and that's very relevant to how we are going to start this discussion. Is that you say that Agastya is India's best kept secret? So, why do you say that?
See, I think a lot of people, when I've been doing these interviews and podcasts as well, have been quite surprised that Agastya is so present in India, in rural India especially. And that visually, if you start looking for Agastya, you'll suddenly start seeing you'll see a mobile van in your city, you'll suddenly see one that passes you. And so you would think with that kind of almost guerrilla style that they have taken in terms of approaching education, that there would be buzzes and there would be a household name that everyone
Yeah.
was familiar with. I believe honestly that it's partly to do with the fact that it's run by extremely pure altruists. And this is something that I found out to an even deeper extent when I wrote the book and did interviews, that people are not really interested in um, having a story even written about them, which is quite remarkable. They were just happy enough that they were getting to tell their anecdotes, getting to recount their experiences, and there was a joy and a kind of an ownership to the whole story, that this is what we've done, and we're not expecting anybody to pat us on the back or sing our praises or anything like that. However, as an NGO, we know that unless you have some kind of projection out there to tell people the kind of good work you're doing, it's difficult to attract more donors. It's difficult to attract the kind of traction we need now for the next leg of our journey. So it is a great, well kept secret, as I said, perhaps one of the best kept secrets because no one really knows how much good work they've been doing. And I wanted to write the book really to break that mold and say that I know they don't want to scream from the rooftops and say this is the kind of crazy good stuff that we've been doing for the last quarter of a century. But I wouldn't mind doing that because it is something I think they deserve.
Yeah, because it's very interesting you say that because when I started reading this book, it's a 25-year long journey, as I said in the starting of the podcast, and it's very like no, for the lack of a better word, sad to see that such an NGO that has been remarkable work for so long, and it's still not a household name as you say. So you are a writer. I like before writing this book, you have written a couple of more books, and like I want to start with what was this transition as to having a corporate job. You had a corporate job, and after that, you writing this book, Agastya. You are one of the board members of Agastya. What impacted you to write this story, to tell this story in the form of a book, so that people may come to know about this more?
So Agastya's story is very compelling. If anything, I think the story could have been even told maybe 10 years ago. What ended up happening was, as you said, I had a corporate job, but of course I left in 2008. I started my own business, my family business, but I took it over, and we were trying to build it again from the ground up. And when things were slow, I would start writing as a way to keep myself busy when I knew I couldn't possibly leave and go home early, but I had to be there. But there was nothing that I had to really do while I was waiting. So writing became a great way to make that time count and be productive and present at the same time. And that went into fiction writing, obviously, and two books came out over the next, 3 or 4 years. And when it was 2019, and it was the 20th year of Agastya's journey, we said it might be a good time to stop and collect together the anecdotes before people start forgetting them, before people start losing the thread as to what compelled them or made them actually be a part of Agastya. So I said, okay, let me try and see if we can turn this into a project and create a book that puts the whole story together. And at some point, the debate was, do we get a ghostwriter? Do we get someone from outside? There was talks of a British writer coming in and doing it. And at one point, I put my hand up and said, listen, I've been very lucky. And in a very strange way, I've been a fly on the wall since the beginning of Agastya's journey, because Ramji, who's Agastya's founder, is my uncle. And so I was living with him in London. He was my guardian. And I had a front row seat, you could say, into his epiphany that he wanted to do something more with his life and go into education in a more meaningful way. And so, having seen that, having then seen the struggle over the next 5 years, wherein he was trying to raise funds, trying to acquire land, trying to create this vision that was not quite complete, but was having roots in education, but they were still feeling their way around, trying to figure out what it is that they want to change in education. So, having seen that part of the journey, and then having seen the success that happened after, for example, Junjunwala stepped in, and the funds were there, and suddenly they had the money required to realize the dreams. And then seeing the journey over the last, I would say, 8 or 9 years, wherein they've become, although you say not a household name, which is true, but definitely in the education space, they've become a powerhouse. And they started gaining more acceptance and recognition within the education landscape, both in India and abroad. And what kind of trajectory that has uh, given to them, and what kind of ambitions that has fueled in them. That made for a very interesting story as far as I was concerned, because it's really being a fiction writer, you want to look for a hero's journey. You want to look for a character that you believe in. You want to look for a conflict that is impacting that character. And then you want to see how did that character resolve the conflict and hopefully have a great ending. And Agastya's story has been that, in fact. So when you talk of the hero, you can say maybe it was Ramji in the beginning, but then there's other characters in the book who then kind of take over, and their struggles and their kind of very creative methods in pushing Agastya's mission forward are each in itself a hero's journey in its own self. And then, of course, you see now the last few years, Agastya is in a very, very good zone wherein they've proven that their methods work, and donors, although we could definitely do with more donors, always, like any NGO. But we get that kind of confidence from the people who've supported us. Like an investor investing in a startup who sits back and says, I'm so glad I believed in you. We get that kind of vibe from our donors now, wherein they say, okay, we saw the vision and we're really glad we went on this journey with you. So that made it a great story for me. And I said, if I can encapsulate it, and if I can, as a board member, have access to the staff, the management, the founders, the donors, other thought leaders who've helped Agastya in the past as advisors or otherwise helping us fine tune our methods, let me interview all these people, collect their perspectives, collect their insights, and put it. And I hope I've done justice, and I thank you for saying it was.
Well, I must say you have done a very good job. And you mentioned fascinating stories. I mean, not just the founders or the board members, students that have interacted with Agastya, they have really fascinating story. I mean, if I'm not wrong, the Operation Vasanta, if I'm not wrong, Vasanta is named after a student that was part of Agastya's training and all of that. Okay, so one of the interesting thing that I found about the founders and the early joiners of Agastya, the management group and the core group, was that as you say in the book, you have mentioned a line that they were not people motivated by money, but they treated their work as a personal crusade. Why I say that is that, well, why you say that is because I found that okay, the core members, founders, Mr. Ramji Raghavan and others, and other people who joined Agastya, they had very well settled job. That they were bankers in companies like JP Morgan, Citibank, and all that stuff. They left their well settled corporate job, their a very high paying job, and they invested into something that they found meaningful. Not just that, you have also people from like acclaimed scientists from ISRO, from DRDO. They also joined, and they were instructors in Agastya and all of those. What do you think was that one principle or that vision that Ramji Raghavan or Agastya had to offer, that they were able to or they were willing to leave those well settled job and join Agastya into that mission?
See, a lot of the folks, the founding team, you could say we had 5 people. So Ramji and Mahavir were both working at that time. Ramji was in London and he left his job and came to Bangalore. Mahavir was already in Bangalore, but he had started to slowly decouple and say that okay, my business can run, or those aspects of the work can be on one side, and started giving his time and giving his space also to Agastya work. And as time went by, they both got more and more involved. The other 3 were already retired. That is Dr. P. K. Iyengar, K.B. Raghavan, and Dr. Balasubramanian,
The three wise men.
the 3 wise men, as we call them. And they were, as mentors, very crucial in driving the vision that was then formed around Agastya. So while Ramji and Mahavi were doing a lot of the legwork, going to campus, coming back, driving back and forth, meeting government officials, going and sitting outside collectors' offices to wait for some permission to run, say, a science fair in that area. That was very difficult work, especially for 2 men that were already maybe in their late 40s and who had already gone through a lot of this, as you would do when you're starting your career, right? You expect all that work to be dirty work to be right at the beginning. So suddenly jumping back into it was a huge check, I think, both on their lifestyle and their egos. And they were very proud of that because they said, okay, we're going back to something wherein we have to completely destroy our perception of the kind of offices we want to sit in, the kind of people that we want to. You don't want to sit outside in a government office, wait outside on a bench for 2-3 hours at a stretch when you've already had a great career. But I think they were willing to do it because they said the cause was very, very compelling. And when other scientists, many of whom were either retired or semi-retired, saw that they were willing to do this, one of the most compelling things was the fact that the founders, the key founders, had made this sacrifice. And it was very difficult then to say, I can't give my time to you. So a lot of them came back saying, okay, we're semi-retired, or we've been working on stuff, but now we're kind of decoupling from our own work. Professors at IISc, professors at DRDO. And it really helped Agastya because we could not have employed or otherwise had access to that kind of those kind of thought leaders at such an early stage. It's like a startup suddenly getting Bill Gates as a mentor, for example, right? You would say, okay, man, how do you even access someone like that? So Agastya was getting access to people at that caliber at a very, very young age. And that allowed them to quickly build the foundation and the vision that they were having and get a lot of buy-ins because people were then saying, okay, if the chief scientist or the head of DRDO is looking at you guys and saying you're doing a wonderful job, or as later if Abdul Kalam is looking at you and saying you're doing a wonderful job, there must be something here. So it gave us a huge kind of a springboard into jumping into that space. And because it was done in the right way, it was done very ethically, and it was done genuinely from a place of love, as Ramji says. It was actually a romance. It's like you fall in love with someone and you do crazy things because you don't even know why, but you have to do it at that point because your mind is just telling you it's worth it, right? And later on, someone might look at you and a friend might say, you're insane. Who would go do such a crazy thing? And you're like, look, when you're in love, these crazy things happen. And so when you speak to Ramji, he said it was basically that mindset. It was, I've fallen in love with this project. And at this point, there are no rules. I will have to break everything I know about how I approach this space, but with the intention that it has to, succeed.
Yeah, you say that you mentioned in the book that Ramji thought that this was a romantic idea. A third person's perspective on starting an NGO or social entrepreneurship, to be precise, it's not very fascinating. Like people don't want to, like people recognize problems, but they don't want to invest themselves to solve it. These people did, and so in the basic education system of this country that has been going on for very long time, what are the key problems that Agastya or the founding fathers they found that needs to be changed, and how do you think that of all the measures that Agastya took, maybe it's the mobile lab, lab on wheels, or lab in the van, if I'm not wrong with the words. So these measures that they took, what were the basic problems that they have found, and do they still continue? I mean, a lot of that still continue, but what was that? What was their perspective on this?
So the main problem was the system by which children were being educated in India. So we write in the book that Dr. Iyengar said that education in India is like a 100-meter race on steroids.
On steroids.
And the one of the reasons he said this was as the preeminent scientist, he was the head of the Homi Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and very, very well respected in the scientific field and a real powerhouse at his time. And he said, yet when we went to look for new recruits, for new hires, for various science projects, which are projects that were coming up around the country, we typically found kids with great degrees, but who were not actually able to answer any fundamental questions on science.
They didn't have the required skills that they.
Or they knew they could answer what they'd already been taught, but they had no way of evaluating a problem from scratch, or thinking through the problem.
Creative work.
Exactly. And so he said this worried him to say that, look, we're giving these kids degrees, but we're not actually teaching them how to approach things from a first principle. We're not teaching them is kind of a system of inquiry where you ask why until you reach the answer. So we always say that you take that journey with a child. It's not about giving them the answer. It is about taking them on a journey and helping them find the answer. And that journey is way more important than I would rather the child takes the journey and gets to a wrong answer than you just spoon feed the answer and then the child says, I know 20 answers, I know everything. Because the child that gets there will eventually find the right answer, but they can use that method to evaluate so many other things in their lives. So I think what the founders felt was that rote learning was causing this to a large extent, and that there was a system of answerism, a kind of a situation where getting the right answer was more important than having a discussion about why the answer is right. And this was leading, as I said, to a lot of folks, a lot of kids being told, okay, you memorize this paragraph, you memorize this formula, you memorize this equation, and you regurgitate it on your exam paper, you will get full marks. If you don't, exactly, we've all been there actually. Right? I still remember passages from my history, ICSE history, because we were told if you do not say this passage verbatim, the examiner is not going to give you the marks.
True.
Now, that is one style of education, and it may even work. For example, you cannot learn Shakespeare if you don't memorize the lines. But at some point, someone stops you and says, okay, what does he mean when he says this? That's the difference. So I can memorize the lines and say them back to you very easily. But if I'm not encouraged to then think about what the meaning is in those words, then I've not really learned Shakespeare. So what Agastya was trying to do is twofold. One is to take science learning to the villages in the form of low-cost models to show children science in action, especially children in government schools, children in villages who would have otherwise been told, here's the textbook, learn everything there is, and that is education. And suddenly I'm reading about, say, the human body, I'm seeing how the lungs work, how air comes into the lungs, and I step outside, there's an Agastya van there with an instructor, and he's using the balloons to show me how the lungs fill up. My perspective changes completely from, okay, this is a boring day in class, to, oh my gosh, does that work? And could that principle be then applied to something else? Which a lot of these kids go home and start tinkering around with things in their house, trying to replicate these models. So one is bringing the joy and the excitement back into science. Number two is then engaging the child and saying, now listen, I know I'm come here as an instructor from Agastya, but my job is not just to show you these models. My job is for you to then, if you want, play with the model, break the model, rebuild the model in front of me, and for us to have a discussion over what is it about this model or this particular thing that you're seeing that is so exciting. And once you encourage the child to have that dialogue, you start breaking some of the fear that the child has. Again, with children in classrooms, if you're a meek child, if you're a quiet child, you don't want to put your hand up. You're scared the teacher will call you a fool if you ask a silly question. You're scared that 5 other kids in class will turn around and laugh at you. And so the fear sets in very early. And then on top of that, you're told if you don't get 98, 99%, you're an idiot. Right? So that kind of fear is not conducive to free thinking and to creative thinking. You want your mind to be free and say that, look, I can think of anything and my teacher will only encourage me. So then you start, once you break that fear down, the child starts exploring more about, is it even science that I enjoy? or am I just really enjoying the learning process? Because this could be applied to music, it could be applied to dance, it could be applied to theatre, anything. And once you engage the child and teach it to start asking questions, not only about the learning process but about themselves, then you have that's the third level lever that Agastya pulls, wherein it is not what did the child learn, it's what did the child come to believe about themselves after they finish learning. And that changes education from purely knowledge transfer, which is what it used to be. And there was a time you had to go to school to learn when did the Second World War start, for example. That's no longer the case. Information has been democratized to a great extent now. Facts are no longer a premium. So it goes from being a knowledge transfer to an identity transfer. So I go to school now not to learn specifically facts and figures, but to discover who it is exactly that I am and how do I contribute meaningfully to society one day by harnessing those skills. And eventually, when we did this, the nicest side effect is that the girls started stepping forth. And the girl at the back of the class was suddenly coming to the front of the class, putting her hand up and saying, wait a minute, why is my opinion any less than the boys who are otherwise loud and boisterous and, tend to overtake the whole class? And I think that Agastya has shown, which is why the pillars were increased. So we started with creativity, curiosity, innovative spirit. And as the years went by, we realized caring and confidence. And that confidence is critical because a lot of these kids come from backgrounds where they're either told, this is your life, or they're told you're a girl, you're probably, if you want to get an education, that's fine, but more often than not, you're just going to be married off anyway. Or you're told that there is no way to break out of this mold. You'll be in this village for the rest of your life, or you'll be in this socio-economic strata for the rest of your life. And what Agastya is doing is trying to break the mold and say, wait a minute, there are no rules that prevent you from doing anything that you want to do. Find out who you are, and that helps you gain the confidence to step out and say, okay, maybe I can do something that is slightly different from what people are telling me I should have done.
Like, it's very interesting you say that because, as you said, most of us, all of us have been part of the system, this rote learning and answers system. I've been a part of that. And like, while you are in that system, you don't realize that because you think that, okay, this is the right thing to do. But when you are 20, 25 and you get to see the real world and you realize that, okay, the things that were told or how the things were told were not up to the mark that they should have been. But that's interesting. And 25 years is a long time, and it's very hard to keep those core values intact when you are moving through a journey. And well, funds start coming in, fame starts coming in, it's and people start coming in. The organization is firstly 10 people, it grows 100, 200, thousands of people join. It is hard to keep those core values aligned. What I want to ask is, in the book you have mentioned that a lot of the early joiners of Agastya, uh, as we have talked about, that there was a vision that they were looking into, and they joined because of that values or the vision that they saw. And a lot of those people were happy to join the process without getting paid.
Yeah.
Because, well, obviously a non-profit organization, there's not a regular income source, there's not a revenue model through which you can pay salaries and other stuff. And in the starting, you said that a lot of people joined because even if they were not ready not to be paid. What I mean to ask is, after 25 years, do you still think that those core values, those ideas, that vision that Agastya started with, are they still intact? I mean to say that, I don't mean to say that people, if they join now, they won't be paid, but is the vision that strong enough to convince someone that even if you're not getting paid, you are putting value to society, you are gaining something that will obviously change your life?
So I think even as an NGO grows, and Agastya has thankfully had very, very generous benefactors, and we've in fact been told more when Junjunwala was alive, for example, he was very, very firm that I don't want the management team getting paid, like that. I would like my money to go towards making sure that you guys, not just you're doing all the work, you should be getting paid well. And I think, again, Agastya was still very frugal. One of the things about having someone like Mahavir, one of the co-founders, is that whatever happened with Agastya, he always held on to the mindset that we are going to be very careful with our
Sticking
money.
to those core values.
Yes. And very mindful of, look, if we go and spend money doing the office up, for example, it took years for the donors to convince Agastya to do up their offices. And even now, they're beautiful, they're very nice offices. It's in a nice place in Bangalore. but it's not opulent. It's not like you're having bean bags everywhere and there's places for people to lounge. It's a nice office. It's got a good buzz, but it's still. And you can see there's a frugality to it. There is a sense that if I go and spend an extra 100 rupees doing work to my office or making a cozier setting, then that's 100 rupees less for potentially a child that might have been reached with a model. Right. So that mindset will, I hope, never change. It's still very much a core value of Agastya, and it's still, even doing the book with a lot of the marketing that we're doing, we're very mindful that we don't want to overspend. Like, this is an important thing to get the message out, but let's be wary about how much we're spending and being careful about that. So I'm glad to know that, to see that that didn't really change very much. Of course, people get paid now, and we try and pay them in line with the industry. So we're not asking teachers and instructors to join and saying we're going to underpay you because the cause is so noble. We don't expect that anymore. And yes, that one time, as you said, quite honestly, a lot of the people who came, especially as volunteers, especially as advisors, Yellappa Reddy, for example, who helped us transform our campus, refused to take money because he really felt it was something that was doing for his soul. And Ramji, I think, refused to take a salary for almost, I think in 2013 or 14 is when they actually started. So it was quite a few years before they took. But I think now it's more corporatized, and I think the donors appreciate that as well. Because we talk about Narayan Murthy and we talk about Amit Chandra, who both had viewpoints on reporting structures, right? How do you create an NGO and you give money to an NGO and then you don't get any feedback? Like Narayan Murthy said, I've given money sometimes and I don't know what happened to the money. So it's very difficult for me to trust someone who's saying I'm doing a good job when there's no reporting back to me in terms of where did the money go. So Agastya has been very firm that even if we need to spend on that kind of infrastructure, it is very important to do right by the donor, to give them a full account of where your money went. And that again is an expense. Keeping a team in place, to having an MIS, for example, which is very rare, but we have one. We have an SAP system running in the background, which basically gives us an idea of where each penny is going. And those costs do build up, but we're very glad that donors respect and appreciate the fact that we're investing in those areas, because it means they're in a much better position to help us even more, because they're able to see the avenues to which their money is going. So it's a good place to be. As I said, when the CSR bill came out in 2013, Agastya's key advantage was that we were one of the few NGOs that had been already doing all the due diligence, the reporting, the statutory compliances that we had been doing. Mahavir was very clear on that we would not slip out of
Yeah,
the.
you've mentioned that it was by that time it was running almost like a
Exactly.
corporate office
Yeah.
runs. Like feedback was given in form of graphs, charts, numbers, statistics, and everything was documented. The data was present so that the donors were kind enough to invest.
So a donor that looked in and was saying, okay, I'm looking at a murky NGO that is not quite, I'm not quite sure where the money is going to go, versus I'm looking at Agastya, where we have a 10-year track record of where they've spent everything that they've spent. Obviously, more aligned to then come and support Agastya. So we were glad for that. And I think that culture has continued. So it's been a balance. You don't want to be corporate, but you don't want to be so corporate that you lose the almost amorphous nature of the altruistic tendencies that people do come into Agastya holding on to. So that's been an interesting balance. I think they've done very well to hold on to it right now. And it's always something that's on our radar that we don't want to tip the balance either way, because both are important.
Another interesting aspect about Agastya is, well, the Agastya campus, because while reading the book there is like you have mentioned in detail how the land was acquired, how the campus was designed, how it unfolded into. I have seen some images. I have not been there obviously, but the images obviously have an appeal to you. It's a vast campus, a 172-acre campus near Bangalore. So talk a bit about how the campus structure was designed, how important is it to have a place which will offer students this kind of knowledge that you guys are going
So
through.
incidentally, there's a QR code at the back of the
Yeah,
book, and
exactly.
you did access that. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm glad, because that was, some people wanted us to put photos in the book,
Mm-hmm.
but it was making it very thick,
Yeah.
and the quality is never as good.
Yeah.
So I said this might be a nicer way to and show that we're more modern, right? You have a, but yes, the campus was acquired again around the turn of the century, and there was nothing there. It was absolutely
It was
barren
barren
land.
land, yeah.
It was not just barren, it was lifeless land. The soil was white, which is the typical telltale sign that there's no organic matter in the soil. and the ground was gravelly. It was coarse and kind of very porous, so rainwater wouldn't stay. It would, even if they had a good rain, it would just flow right through campus, and being at a slight elevation, it would just flow off downhill. Um, the campus was the first sign, I would say, that, and to be clear, the campus was acquired at that time with the intent of building a school.
Yeah.
And that never happened. Agastya's model pivoted completely when they realized it was way more effective if it took education out into the country rather than try to get a few kids onto a
Exactly.
campus and teach them. And the campus was then treated as the ideation center, which is what it still is. And it's become a great source of collecting Agastya's insights from around the country, you could say, and putting them in one place into labs on campus. So if you go to the campus now, there's about 22 labs. There are residential quarters for kids who want to come and spend a few days there. So sometimes schools will send a class, and that class might spend 3 or 4 days on campus. And ecological efforts started back in 2000, 2001, with the idea that we want to gently bring back life into the soil. And once we start bringing life back into the soil, plants will immediately start coming up. The smaller plants will definitely come, and then we can look at building something more green, and which is what it is today. And this was, we describe it in the book, but Yellappa Reddy went about this process of gentle manipulation, introducing species of spider, introducing specific plant species that he thought were conducive to helping the other fauna uh, propagate a lot more. Uh, Removing acacia, which is a very invasive species in that area. Lantana, acacia, these are all species that are actually not indigenous. Acacia came from Australia. Lantana was actually brought from England as an ornamental plant for some flower show many years ago. Another offshoot of colonialism and the amazing impact it's had. And it's a huge forest fire hazard now because they dry up and become like bales of hay, effectively waiting to catch fire. So a small spark anywhere, and you'll have a blaze. So all this had basically destroyed the entire landscape. So these guys were trying to reverse that effect, and it was monumental. It was a Herculean task. I think it was at least 10 years before you saw any kind of improvement. And they plowed through those 10 years saying that no, we can see that there is something is going to happen at the end. And everything was organic, planting specific saplings, supporting them with organic manure, watering them, even though they were not getting anything from the surrounding soil, but making sure they at least had enough to thrive, and then allowing them to shed
Yeah.
their leaves.
If I'm not wrong, it is an area which significantly has less rainfall. If I'm not wrong.
It's fairly drought prone. It
Yeah.
has very, very low. We've been very lucky, I think, in the last 10 years. We've had, I think, only one bad year, 1 or 2 bad years. And again, like most places that do a great job of harvesting rainwater, they've done an immense drive all around campus so that if there is a good rain, a lot of water collects in percolation tanks around the campus, and it's allowed to slowly get into the soil rather than just flow through as it used to do and just leave. And as plants came and as trees came, suddenly you saw, yes, a lot of the water is then now being retained as you would expect. The color of the soil starts to change. The fabric of the flora and fauna starts to change. You start seeing initially insects start coming back. Then lizards come because they want to eat the insects. Snakes come because they want to eat the lizards. Birds come because they want to eat the snakes.
Yeah.
And that is
So
your
it's
food
basically
chain.
a food
You
chain
create
established.
so
Yeah.
they effectively rebuilt the food chain around that area in a way that is honestly mind-boggling. It's a case study in ecological transformation. And once the birds came, they found, okay, now suddenly we're in another gear because bird droppings are great fertilizer. They're great for germinating seeds. A lot of seeds don't germinate unless the bird eats them and then discards them, and then that is the only way that tree will grow. So even if you have the seed and if you have a tree, you're just going to have one. And it's only when the birds come that you start seeing the same kind of tree is now growing all over. And because they planned it in such a way that these were non-invasive species, these are species that promoted the ecology of the area. The moment that started happening, then the life started coming back. So today we have a campus. As I said, there's peacocks. We see wild boars, all kinds of birds. We have a butterfly park, and it's all organic. It's not like anyone brought these animals and said, now live here. They've just gravitated towards the campus purely by seeing that, okay, there's a vibe here that is conducive to harmony. That's an environment where I can thrive and where I'll be safe, which is the other thing. It's a very sattvic, very pure kind of feel that you get on campus. It's fully vegetarian. No
Okay.
alcohol is obviously allowed because again, you have children there,
Yeah,
and
of course, of
there
course.
are
True.
rules that once you come in, you got to leave your
Yeah.
city self behind and be absolutely. And it's a brilliant thing. Like I've known many people come from the city and just say, I don't feel it. I don't feel I'm missing out on anything because it's like literally entering some kind of very spiritual place where you feel like abandoning your city life and just living in that zone. And so elephants, we've seen leopards, and again, this only happens if there's a genuine vibe of trust and kindness, I think, in that area. And I think the animals pretty much tell you how the children feel. So now we have about 600 kids who come in for the same reason because they just feel this vibe. They feel they're included. They feel they're able to engage. They feel they're learning things that they don't learn in class. And so we invite about 600 kids every day from surrounding schools. And even though Agastya itself is not a school, it becomes like a day trip for them. And so every morning, Agastya buses go out, bring these children back to campus. They're fed there. If kids come from neighboring states, then they can even stay there overnight. And they get to enjoy, depending on what kind of school trip they've come on. They might go to the biology lab and spend half a day there. They might go to the robotics center, spend some time. There's a maths lab. There's a biodiversity center. There is a innovation hub where they can actually make things, where you have a maker space where you can create. They have 3D printers and CNC, VMC machines where you can actually machine parts. So kids who have an idea for an invention. Imagine a village child thinking, okay, I can think of, but where do I get the resource to even make it? And then you come to Agastya and you say, I have this idea. And an instructor takes you and says, okay, fine, let's build this.
And it's all available for free for the
And it's
children.
available for free
Yeah.
and you can. So if you go to the Innovation Hub, you see a lot of these various
Yeah.
inventions that kids have made. And many of them go on to win these Iris prizes, which are national level prizes. And it's kids from villages who've been exposed to Agastya, who've had some interaction and been made to feel the confidence that yes, we can compete on that stage. Going there and getting every year. So when I interviewed the the people of the Iris
Mm-hmm.
Foundation, she's like, it's remarkable. We all find it so hilarious that these kids come from private schools, from Bangalore, from Delhi, from Bombay, well-to-do kids from great families, and this one group will come from
Yeah.
Agastya, and we know that they're going to make a mark. And it's just, and these kids will normally, like the kids who come from private schools, it'll all be about, I'm trying to solve traffic issues,
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve, and I'm making an app to make it more. And the amazing thing about the Agastya kids, it's grassroots level solutions.
Mm.
So one kid invented a seed planting device because his grandmother, he was living with his grandmother, he didn't have parents, and her back would ache because she had to keep bending to plant the seeds. So he made this device when she just pokes this stick into the soil, it deposits one seed, and when she pulls it out, the seed is in there. This other girl makes gloves out of a special material because her father was a stone cutter. And again, he would come home, he'd have blisters on his hands. So she said, I want to make gloves that protect these particular areas. And these are eighth, ninth standard kids. It's not, they aren't scientists as
Yeah,
such,
the kids.
but these are real world
Mm.
problems. And for them, they're even closer to home. And having an avenue to even say, I'm devising some kind of a solution gives them tremendous confidence.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. Okay, so three initiatives of Agastya that I want to talk about that was very interesting. Firstly, the lab in a van, of course, that was one of the first ventures that Agastya started. Secondly, the YIL, young instructor leader, and thirdly, of which you are also the chairperson, that is Navam, which was a measure. I want to talk about these three things.
Okay, so the mobile van, as we describe in the book, was again a innovation born out of crisis, I suppose, right? So they didn't have money to start a school. They had all these experiments. Agastya had been doing science fairs in that area around the campus for a couple of years at least, and the buzz was very good. People were excited. The footfalls were great. Uh, People from surrounding villages, even government officials were calling and saying, "Hey, can you do another science fair in this area?" Everyone seemed to really like it. The children really love it. So they knew their methods, the low-cost models that they were building and taking to kids, were resonating with the children. And so one fine day, there was a van. They'd been again gifted the van by Hindustan Motors, I think. And they just put all the experiments in a van and they said, look, let's just see what happens. So Balram, who was Agastya's
Yeah,
first employee, and we write about him in the book,
it's
and
it's he
he's
is a fascinating person.
and it was fun. He was the one who told me that the campus there was not enough shade to keep a water bottle when I first joined. And there's a beautiful tree at the entrance of campus, which he's like, that was my tree. I brought it in my pocket. I planted it there, and now it's like this beautiful thing. So that kind of ownership is wonderful to hear. So he went with the mobile van, and of course it was hilarious because it was a white van approaching children, which
Yeah.
anyone knows that's a red flag. And what are you going? And the kids would run away because
Yeah.
not only is it scary to see a white van
Mm.
come, but they thought they were coming to give vaccinations.
Hmm.
So all the kids didn't want, obviously, a medical van coming in
Yeah.
giving them injections. And then the van opens and they see it's all these playthings really for them, which is what they are. They're toys, but in the form of science. And suddenly the kids are now more engaged. And then people start coming saying, "Mobile van, can you fix my mobile phone?" So again, Balram had to explain that no, that's not what it is. It's a mobile van. It's science. And of course, now Agastya's vans are very colorful and they're beautifully painted, and you see them and you feel joy because there is literally joy painted on the van in terms of the cartoons they use, and it's something very nice. But I think the mobile van became a symbol of Agastya's attempts to actually take science to the villages and to rural areas. And the moment they realized it worked, two things changed. One is the whole school concept was pivoted, and we said, okay, if we can't, as we say, if the mountain won't go to Muhammad, then Muhammad goes to the mountain. And so again, that is again one of the reasons that it's called the moving in mountains, because we were taking education to the classrooms, and it was resonating with the kids. Teachers were happy because they were getting a little bit of time off when the vans would come. 2 hour sessions with the kids, and then that allowed us then to go to donors and say, look, I'm not asking you to give me crores of rupees to build a campus. I'm asking for a little bit of money so I can build one more mobile van. So you could say the price point per SKU, as it were, drastically reduced. And so at this point, as we write in the book, the dot-com bubble had just burst. Money was generally short. So asking people for a lot of money for one thing was a lot tougher than asking a lot of people for little money for smaller things. And so that money slowly, it was still very, very difficult. The first 5 or 6 or 7 mobile vans, each one was a monumental victory, I think, for Ramji at that time. And even when Junjunwala met him for the first time, I think he got money for 2 vans, right? And he was overjoyed at that time because he felt, okay, 2 vans is great. Now we have, hundreds of vans, hundreds of bikes flying all over the country. And it's become a symbol, I could say, of Agastya's reach, that when a van goes into a school, and I've done this, I've gone with an instructor into a classroom, and it's like being in a rock concert, right? Suddenly they're like so excited that this guy's come, and you feel at that moment, you kind of feel that, okay, this is why we do it, right? This is why it's important, and this is why it's worth being a part of this journey, because you can just see it immediately in the kids when they react, that okay, this is a unburdened source of joy for them in their day. And so that started expanding, and that allowed Agastya then to expand its reach without necessarily increasing, as we say, the cost per exposure. The second thing you said was
The young instructor.
the YIL, of
Yeah.
course, yeah. So the origins of the YIL we speak about here as well. And it's a lovely story because it's, again, one of Agastya's first science fairs. 500 people were supposed to come, but suddenly they get told the evening before or maybe a few days before by the government official who was organizing it that I think you guys can expect about 5,000. And at this point, Agastya already just had a few
Hmm.
instructors. They said, we absolutely cannot take that kind of volume, but at the same time, we're very new, we're just starting out. It's like in a business, you get a huge order, you don't want to say no to it
Yeah.
because you're like, this client may not come back, or it may just tarnish my reputation. And so, in the midst of that, a group of girls, and again, it's always a group of girls that kind of thinks through the
Yeah.
problem and very audaciously comes forth and says, can you teach us? If you teach, like me and my classmates, if you teach us, we'll teach the kids. So we'll man some of the
Yeah.
simpler stalls. You guys walk around and do the, kind of set the tone and the more complex stuff. And it turned into a huge success because suddenly you had this peer-to-peer learning that was happening. And as Agastya found out later on, when a child teaches another child, their own absorption of the content is much higher. And so suddenly you're saying peer-to-peer learning, you take away the fear because you're learning from a contemporary rather than an adult. You have a lot more dialogue. So even the kid that's teaching the other kid might not know everything. And so then they start collaborating to try and find the answer together. And it becomes a system of inquiry rather than a one-way, I'm going to teach and you're going to listen. And so these girls were the first time that Agastya said, wait a minute, what if there are kids, and yes, we'd love to reach all the children, but there's always going to be one or two super enthu kids who
Yeah.
are going to step forward and say, I want to learn more. And you want to be able to give those kids a little more attention, especially if they're showing. We don't necessarily look for aptitude, we look for enthusiasm.
Yeah.
If the child is enthusiastic to learn more, we try and bring them into the fold. And they become young instructor leaders. So when we go with the vans, for example, sometimes you might do a little extra session with the YIL
Yeah.
kids in that particular school. And YIL has been supremely successful.
Yes.
We've seen the college enrollment rates for YILs at 98% basically. So India's average is 22%. So when you think of that kind of delta, you say, okay, my intervention with a child, even if it's 4, 5, 6 times a year, but just allowing them to share their ideas, having these discussions, maybe putting them in a leadership position for a while, wherein they manage science fairs or they take on a slightly more administrative role when it comes to Agastya projects, suddenly makes them that much more confident that they should elevate and level up, as it were. So that's been a huge source of pride for Agastya. And I think now there's about 50,000 YLs, I think, every year.
Yeah. Every
And
year.
I think, yeah, we
Yeah.
reach, I mean, it's quite it's a big cadre basically.
Yeah.
And it keeps, of those kids graduate, they go on, new kids come in and replace them. But the idea is, and these kids we actually track. It's tough to track 5 million kids that Agastya reaches, but the YLs are more closely monitored. And so we are able to see the kind of careers they go into. And again, it's not about everybody's becoming a scientist at NASA. It is, my father was a farmer, or a stone cutter, or a janitorial, house cleaner or some housekeeping staff. And I always thought that would be, I'd maybe elevate myself to a slightly higher level, maybe. But here I'm a chartered accountant, or I'm studying, or I'm working in an IT company,
Yeah.
or I'm making, some cases, making my own YouTube channel. This kid is doing that. That leap that happened is something we've seen, this generational shift, wherein we see the distribution of professions with the parents and with the kids. There's a huge shift from the primary to the secondary and tertiary sector. So you're creating a jump that would normally take maybe 3 or 4 generations, and you're creating within one generation.
It's basically a mindset shift
Exactly. It is a
that is
purely
having.
the
Yeah.
belief that you put into a child that you do not need to take your circumstance as fixed around you.
True.
It is completely mutable, and you can change it if you just have the right tools to think through your problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very much fascinated about Navam because it is need of the hour, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about Navam
So
also.
Navam was initially started to do a more intense, I could say, YL kind of thing. So we really wanted to find diamonds in the rough. Agastya was never about finding the next C.V. Raman or the next Ramanujan. It was always about raising the level of the ocean just a little more and making creativity a mindset with all the children. But then occasionally you'll find, if we can find in all of this someone who's truly exceptional, do we then let them be, or do we really give them the resources? So Navam started with that mandate, but at some point that changed, and now what's actually happening is they are using Agastya's IP to take into the private sector and to commercialize some of Agastya's IP and bring in revenue from the private sector, which can then be used to support the government sector as well, or
Yeah.
the underprivileged. So in effect, it's you're effectively selling to private schools, you're selling to labs, for example, who want science centers developed, training teachers for private schools using Agastya's method, and there's a revenue model there that then helps Agastya to kind of, and it's very new. Obviously, Navam is still in its very, very early stages. It's just started creating that kind of revenue. And in parallel, Navam has done a very interesting thing, which is it's used, being based in Hyderabad, it's used the Telangana TSAT network, which is the satellite network for the Telangana state. And they've done a brilliant job in putting digital screens in all classrooms, even in government schools. And I think more states are now following suit, and they require content,
Yeah.
and good content. You obviously
course.
can't play a soap or just
Yeah.
a normal YouTube show. So Navam said we will develop some of that content for you, and so now that is reaching about 3 million kids every day, or throughout, and the content is revised and it's Agastya content. So we get a lot of it's like a great petri dish to then evaluate what is the reaction that's happening and how are kids reciprocating to the content that they're putting out. And they're doing it for Agastya work, We've now started a program on financial literacy. Again, taking that content, teaching kids what are the pitfalls of scanning the wrong QR code. What does it mean when you take a loan from someone and he says, pay me double tomorrow? What does that interest rate actually mean compared to what is the interest rate you should be paying?
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids have parents who fall into these financial pitfalls, and because they're uneducated, they're not able to get out of it.
Yeah.
So the idea is the way we've done with science, taking financial literacy also to the villages, and using children as a way to educate even their parents. So you tell your father, please don't scan that code. And I've had relatives who've scanned codes
Yeah.
and lost money, and they're
We've all
educated
been there,
people.
yeah.
So you can only imagine what happens to someone who doesn't have the luxury of losing, say, 5,000 rupees and saying, okay, it was a bad mistake. It could be financial ruin for him. So Navam is basically doing a lot of this, and then again that information feeds back into Agastya in terms of, okay, this is the reaction kids are having to this content, and so how do we fine tune it and improve it? So it's an exciting stage in Agastya's journey. It's also exciting because after COVID, a lot of digital learning had to have become possible. Agastya only survived because it was able to convert some portion of its hands-on to digital.
Yeah, you've mentioned it specifically in the book about
Exactly.
what COVID-19 did to Agastya.
Yeah, it should have destroyed us, but again, resilience of as Taleb says, anti-fragile. I think it was truly one of those case studies of anti-fragility, wherein rather than destroy, the entire thing actually made the organization stronger in having that adversity and having that problem put upon it. To say you're a hands-on system, you rely on face-to-face interactions. It's literally the poison pill. It's literally poison for your organization when we say lockdown is being implemented. And rather than allow it to defeat them, the team came out and said, okay, what can we do? In this scenario, how do we still remain Agastya?
Yeah, because you mentioned that Agastya relied on peer-to-peer and face-to-face interactions with the students and with the instructor, and coming through a lockdown where making eye contact or being physical with just 1 or 2% was physically impossible. So how that's a fascinating story about how
So
you
that
guys
allowed
managed
us
that.
to explore the digital
Yeah.
space. And then once COVID ended, we said, wow, we've actually shown that we can do a lot of good in digital without necessarily becoming fully digital.
Yeah.
So right now, Agastya is treading that fine balance that we want to use digital and physical, what we call phygital learning, as a way to expand our reach, because you can't only do it with
Yes.
physical learning, and being very mindful of the fact that if you go too digital, then you dilute the joy of physical learning.
Yes.
So that balance is something that is still very much being found within the organization, and it's something that I believe when Agastya is done will look completely innovative. And like all things they've done, I think it'll be an extremely creative way to combine digital and physical in a way that still keeps the child very, very engaged.
Yeah. I just have couple of more questions regarding this. Uh, how far is Agastya? How deeper Agastya has reached inside this country? Because the last I read the numbers, it's 22 states. Have you guys reached? How far that journey has gone?
Oh, so we're at about 23 states now, I think, 22 or 23 states. Pretty much everywhere except, I think now we've hit Assam as well. So we have and with the government's help, in fact. So that's been a recent initiative that's happened wherein we've been able to get into the Northeast. And of course, the rest of the Northeast is still very much untapped. So other than the rest of the Northeast and Kerala, those are the only two places we're not currently operating in. The rest of the country is pretty much our playground in that sense, and we've done very well to not only expand but to do it in a very collaborative way with the government. So the government looks at Agastya and says, okay, you guys are complementing what we're doing in a very honest and very correct way. And so we get a lot of support with them saying, we like what we are doing, and we like the fact that you're willing to work with us to make it a balance rather than we're coming and telling you how it should be.
And so, lastly, I want to ask. So, 25 years have gone by, a long journey, and I hope with this podcast and with the kind of social things that you guys are doing, I hope it reaches to more people. But I want to ask, what is the vision forward for Agastya in the, let's say, the next 25 years of how far you want to take this change that you have begun? Because what I can understand after reading this book and this conversation is that you are trying to solve very basic problems that has seeped into the not just the education system but the society as well. So trying to solve basic things, and uh, how far are you thinking into the next vision 2.0, as you say in the book? Uh, let's say the next 25 years, what's the goal looking at for Agastya?
So we call it 2.0, Agastya 2.0, and one of the things is what we're discussing, digital learning. How do we use that to expand reach without necessarily impacting the richness of the experience the child has? So the idea is to reach 100 million children by the mid 2030s, I suppose. It was more aggressive. Then COVID came, and we accepted that a few years have been lost. Um, and that will be the next stage of the journey. I think that's what currently is very much a part of our. At 100 million, you can genuinely feel you've made long-lasting impact, because you still look at India, the ages of kids that we deal with, which is typically fifth to ninth standard. You're still looking at about 200, 300 million kids. So when you reach 5 million, it looks like a very big number, especially if you go outside and you tell someone in the West. It's a huge number for them. For us, it's still the beginning. And at 100 million, you start saying, or at 20 million a year, or 25 million kids a year, you start saying, okay, now I'm really starting to create tangible impact, because there's enough kids now that are within the system that are going through then Agastya's method and are probably coming out with this idea of how useful creativity and curiosity can be for them. So that's currently where we are.
Yeah. And lastly, any message that you have for people who are going to watch this podcast? How can they reach Agastya? Of course, I'm going to leave the link to this book and the Agastya website into the description. But if general public needs to know more or want to connect with Agastya, want to join in the initiative, what message do you have for them?
So yeah, the website is well equipped to inform you about what they do. The book, of course, is the story. So if you want to be inspired and if you want to know how these guys went about it, as we say, there's different kinds of people we are expecting to reach with the book. One of them is definitely your kind of audience, young kids, many of whom I find are socially extremely aware. And so, but as you said, you see a problem, but you think it's a very large problem, and what can I possibly do to solve it? So it's a great way to inspire yourself to say, okay, you can start from zero and still create tangible impact. It just requires the right amount of effort. So potential social entrepreneurs, I think, would have a great view in terms of how an organization can be built. It's a great book for, I think, anyone looking to build an organization of any kind. Right? As I said, it's very corporatized. It's created a structure that I think transcends NGOs and corporates. Right? It's something that when we talk about how people were hired, how the team is kept motivated, I think any organization would look at that and say, okay, this is best practices that I could potentially apply to my organization. And third, of course, we're always looking for donors. So people looking to contribute, it's an important thing for us. And again, telling the story is one thing. It's inspiring, it's heartwarming, there are nice anecdotes. But understanding, and the only chapter I think in the book that's a little heavy is the one where we talk about the TQM, the total quality management. And I kept it in there because I want someone who reads this to understand the extents to which Agastya has gone to create an organization where quality is fiercely protected and constantly monitored. And I think donors would look at that and say, okay, here's an organization that will take care of my money if I was to invest in them, and possibly not just spend it and then shrug their shoulders and say, we don't know where it went. So you will get honest and very, very tangible feedback in terms of where the investment went. And lastly, yes, it's, as I said, a hero's journey, as I said in the beginning. And who doesn't like a good hero's journey, right? Who doesn't like a story that ends happily, as I think this one does? And if that's what you're looking for, then it's been written in that narrative as well. And I hope if you do read it, you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, it's a very interesting read, I must say. I have read the book. It's really interesting. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
And of course, I would like, of course, the book's description, the link to buy the book, and Agastya's link website will be in the description. Do check those out. And once again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you had a good time.
I had a wonderful time. Thank you.
I've would love to visit the campus one day, of course.
Please
because
do.
That sounds very interesting.
I've told anyone
Yeah.
that's had podcasts with me that they must make it, because as much as I've tried to do justice, I can tell you with all my writing skills employed, I've probably fallen a little short
Yeah.
in describing just how beautiful the campus is. So check it out online. There's videos of the campus,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
again are very great to watch. but obviously nothing beats going there
Yeah,
yourself. So,
that's true. That is true. Thank
so
you, sir.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much, sir.
Thank
Thank you.